Hey everyone, thanks for listening. Really excited today. I got someone I'm proud to call a friend of mine, Ali Rizvi on. Ali is he's the author of Atheist Muslim, which is uh, an excellent book, and you should all read it. He's also a co-host Secular Jihadist for Muslim Enlightenment. Also, you're a pathologist by training, right?
I am. I'm an oncologic pathologist, a cancer pathologist by training. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I was hoping to have you just talk to you about how how we're talking about Islam. Let's just say, I'm trying to focus on like talking about different difficult topics, and
Mhm.
you know, like especially like I said, your book and then the podcast you're doing. It just like the discourse around that, and how it's going bad. Like I'll give you a silly example that I saw today, and it's silly and it's really scary.
Mhm.
The Chinese government didn't have any mention of the Year of the Pig in their New Year's celebration. And when they were like ABC Australia was in China and this was going on, people were complaining. Then they censored all the complaints about the fact that the Year of the Pig wasn't mentioned. And they spoke to some Chinese people in different parts of China, and some of them were saying, well, because they weren't aware of what was going on with the Uyghurs, they're saying, oh, well, we have to not offend our Muslim neighbors.
Oh,
And
the Uyghurs. So those are that's a Muslim population
that's
in China
yeah,
that is
that's
being oppressed. Yeah.
yeah, that's one. That's
Yeah.
like about a million of them. And they're a specific section of China. They're like a certain, I don't know, I guess tribe or whatever, ethnic.
But
Like
how would the Year of the Pig
because
offend?
because because well, the one of the ones I can read you exactly,
Oh,
which is
pig. Is it the pig?
yeah, exactly the pig. And one of them said, one woman they interviewed said, "We need to avoid talking about the pig to respect the Muslim community who consider pigs as their heavenly ancestor." I mean that's completely wrong, anyways. But I mean, like the
Ah.
population, like the government is not mentioning the Year of the Pig. They're saying to not offend the Muslims, but at the same time they're interring like over a million Muslims. And so I mean, there's that, but then there's all the stuff that goes on out here, like either you know one extreme to the other. It's really hard to find a measured approach to talk about issues with Islam.
Yeah, I know, and even China's struggling with it, huh? So yeah, I don't know I don't know that much about the story, and I really don't know which side to go with because I mean, this is one of those things where you know you've got it's just I mean, just break out the popcorn, right? I mean, you've got China on one side, and then you've got them being apologetic toward Islam on the other side, and then you have them actually doing much worse things to the Muslims in China, the Uyghurs, than uh, than using than celebrating the Year of the Pig, which would be a very minor thing
Yeah,
in comparison. So yeah, there's I guess that is a good example of the confusion around this about how to talk about it.
yeah.
Um, so it is, yeah, it has become a little comical, hasn't it?
Well, okay. I mean, that's just it. It's you're getting. I mean, the Women's March. That's another one. Like they still have the hijab is their symbol. They still have so I know that doesn't really it's not really talking about Islam, but it's you know they're denying that they're in denial that their leadership is promoting something that's terribly misogynistic,
Mm.
but they call themselves a Women's March. And I like it's
But it's not. I think with the Women's March situation over like the very first time it happened until now, I think there has been a bit of an encouraging development in the sense that there are many mainstream people who have realized who've acknowledged the anti-Semitic overtones and everything that some of the leaders, well, people like Linda Sarsour have. Right? They've understood they've broken away from it, including the woman who founded the Women's March, as well as a lot of mainstream liberal women celebrities like Alyssa Milano and Deborah Messing and some of these people who've broken away from it, dissociated from it because it didn't turn out to be what they thought it would be. And this is something, to our credit, we've been talking about for a couple of years. So that's something that I would see as encouraging, in the sense that it is not one of those things that everybody is taking seriously, like they did some time ago.
Okay,
It's
sorry,
it's become diluted, but
sorry, I didn't. I phrased that wrong then because I wasn't talking
uh
about like I am glad that it is being denounced and that local chapters of women's marches are disassociating themselves from the national organization, right? I
right,
was
right,
talking more
yeah,
about the organization themselves. Like they're still
yeah. They're still
they're not disassociating with themselves. It's just like how are you holding these two things at the same time, right?
they are, and the thing with the hijab is, on our podcast on Secular Jihadist for a Muslim Enlightenment, or Sexual Jihadist for Muslim, whichever one you want. Um, we had we as you phrased it, which I love. I'm going to suggest that name change to Armin. But the one thing that I realized when we spoke to Masih Alinejad. Masih Alinejad is she's the Iranian woman who started the My Stealthy Freedom
Yeah.
campaign. She also wrote a book called The Wind in My Hair, which is a fantastic book. Armin says it's one of the best books he's ever read. Where she spoke about her experience as a woman who lived in Iran. She was a journalist. She used to wear the hijab, and now she's advocating for the freedom to take it off. Um, and one thing that she said that resonated with me was that if we want to have, and I'm kind of paraphrasing and adding some of my own interpretation into it, is that if we want to have a good, productive dialogue about this issue with the hijab, especially here in the West, then we have to frame it as an issue of choice, as an issue of women's choice, right? So we have to bring any kind of attention to the symbol. We have to talk about how the vast majority of women in the world who wear it, and that's millions and millions and millions of women who live in Saudi Arabia, where it's mandated by the government that they have to wear it. In Iran, where they have to wear it. In other countries where that they have to wear it because of certain just societal pressures, like for instance, if they don't wear it in some areas of Pakistan, then they can be assaulted, and nobody's going to protect them because they're going to think that we're asking for it, right? So, by their fathers, by their husbands, by their mothers, right? So when you have when you frame it that way, that the vast majority of women are not allowed to wear it, and you show images of them burning their hijabs and taking off their hijabs in Iran, that is that crux of choice, that topic of choice. When we bring that into it, I think it makes for a much more compelling argument that appeals much more universally to people. And there is confusion about this because, on the one hand, there are women who choose to wear it over here. You don't want to sound like you're telling them what to wear. I know that it's a faulty thing. I know that the symbol has a history and all of that, but you don't want to do that. At the same time, you also want to highlight the fact that the majority of women are forced to wear it. So that, I think, is a good way to frame it. The Women's March, obviously, as you said, has it very, very confused. They're unable to figure out, unfortunately, that what they're celebrating here. Like, for example, our mutual friend Yasmin Mohammed, she fought for 20 years to be able to take off the hijab, which was used as a tool to oppress her. And she was here in Canada. She grew up in Canada, and was used as a tool to diminish her. And she fought for 20 years. She finally got the courage to take it off. She talks about how difficult it was. She talks about how she broke away from her family. She was completely excommunicated from her community. She had to start over completely on her own. And then she sees images on TV of people in the Women's March wearing the hijab as a symbol of defiance and as a symbol of feminism. And she found it not just outrageous, but she found it triggering. It was emotionally upsetting to her for good reason, because that was a symbol that was at the heart of so much of the abuse that she suffered growing up. So that distinction is something that I think when you have activist groups, often there's a very binary kind of thing. It has to be this way or that way, and they don't. I don't think they understand those nuances and the lived experiences of people, and how the same symbol has been caused so much pain to some people, and it has caused, whereas other people use it by choice, right? So,
Yeah,
um,
yeah. I mean, okay, just want to, because I heard a lot there, but I mean, like, I think on that same point, I've done, I wanted to change the way I was talking about it, because I never talked about it saying we have to force people to stop wearing it. It's always okay. Let's give people the
mm,
choice. Let's always have the choice. But at the same
yeah,
time,
yeah,
you know, I would joke around if I saw a woman in a hijab, but she was wearing like skin tight clothes or a mini skirt or whatever. Like I'd crack a joke about that because it's contradictory, right, to what the hijab is supposed to be, and
hmm
then it's supposed to represent modesty, but then there's no modesty. Like it's going against what it's. The hijab is not just the scarf; it's the whole mindset behind it, right? So I
hmm
joke about that, but then I think maybe even like the last year and a half, I was thinking about, okay, someone like Yasmin, she was fighting to take it off. So if you saw her wearing the hijab or the niqab, and your reaction was, well, she must be homophobic, she must be this, she must be that, right? Like,
very good point. Yeah,
it's like it's horrible to put all that on like just put Yasmin aside for a second, but like it's putting all on a little girl saying, okay, at 9 years old, put this on because if not, you're going to dishonor your family. You're going to dishonor yourself. You can't get married. You'll be impure. Like that's a huge heavy burden to put on a little girl. But at the same time too, like Yasmin, she had to put on her, I think, the niqab. She had to put on her or the hijab at like a very young age. To put on a little girl like then you represent misogyny, you represent homophobia, that's also a huge heavy burden to put on a girl like someone like Yasmin, who is not wanting to wear it but is forced to wear it, right? So it's
yeah,
like like you said, I agree with you. We have to talk about it as a choice, and
yeah.
maybe like I said, joking with someone who's got a hijab on, but they're not, like I saw it in Malaysia. She's wearing a hijab, but like it was like tank top and a microskirt. And it's like,
hmm
okay, maybe she's come to some arrangement with herself and come, I'm wearing this to represent my piety, but I'm not using it for modesty or whatever. Like, so instead of making a joke,
I,
ask why you do it,
yeah.
right?
Often they're not even thinking that. I mean, we ascribe it because we know the history of it.
Yeah,
We know that hijab is, a lot of people listening to this will probably say, "Why are these two guys sitting here talking about hijab? Why are they telling women what to wear?" And then what they won't realize is that hijab is a male invention. It was
right.
invented not by 21st century men like us, but by 7th century men, who and this is it's an Islamic thing. It was invented by in Islam. What would you had a male prophet, right? You had you have a holy book that refers to God or Allah as with male pronouns, right? You have the four caliphs who were all male. They were all polygamous. You had the 12 imams of your Shia. They were all male. Even in the reformist sects like the Ismailis and the Ahmadis, every spiritual leader has been male. There's not a single, not one, from thousands and thousands of people, not one female spiritual leader in all of Islam. So if they're going to tell us that we're mansplaining, but honestly, like hijab is essentially it's the essence of mansplaining. That's what it is. It's basically a male prescribed, it's a male prescription for women. It's men essentially telling 7th century men telling women what to wear. That is what the hijab is by definition. So there's that aspect, we're talking about it, but um, most young girls, and I know a lot of young girls who wear hijab, young women who wear the hijab, they're not even thinking of, what it stands for historically, what it stood for. They're doing it because it's just something that they were told to do. And often the same person wearing the hijab, for them, it is both a choice and not a choice simultaneously, or Schrodinger's hijab. But like, this is, and I'll explain why. So in my book is, one of the things I really try to drive home, the central thesis of it is trying to separate Islamic ideology from Muslim identity. Islam is an ideology, it's a set of ideas. It doesn't have rights or feelings, and Muslims are people who do have rights and feelings. They're human beings, right? So there's a distinction between the two. So what happens is, and this is an example that I think I've given on the podcast as well before, on our podcast, is that you are, and I've seen cases like this, where you have a young girl, say in, we're both in Canada, say in Toronto or Montreal, one of our cities, right? And she goes to high school, and she has just always been raised to wear the hijab by her parents. They've told her, mother wears a hijab, the whole family wears it, and she's been told that she has to wear the hijab. Now she's going to high school. All of her friends are out there, doing stuff with their hair, experimenting with makeup, the things that teenagers do, just whatever you do in a Western society like the US or Canada. And she wants to be part of that. She wants to belong in that group as well. So privately at home, she's rebelling against her parents. She's like, why do I have to wear this? Maybe she sees a Majid Nawaz video talking about how it's not Islamic. He's like, hijab is not Islamic. Mom and dad, why do I have to do this? And they have that discourse back and forth, just like teenagers do. They're rebelling. So she's rebelling against the ideology behind the hijab. She's exposed to Western ideas of feminism. People are saying, guys don't have to do this. Why do I have to do this? All those arguments are happening. And she is rebelling. But then what happens is that, this orange Cheeto guy goes down the escalator, and he goes, and then he makes an announcement later that year saying that we have to put a complete ban on all Muslims entering the United States until we can figure out what the hell is going on. And this is back when he said all Muslims, a Muslim ban. So he does that, and suddenly she sees her parents are hurt. She sees her family's hurt. These are people that she cares about. And this is her heritage. It's her, ancestors, all of that. And now she says, well, fuck you, Trump. I'm going to wear this thing. Okay, now it's a symbol of identity. So if you ask her, are you choosing to wear it? You look at the discussions with her parents when she's rebelling against it. In that sense, no, she's not. She's doing it because her parents told her to. But then you ask her if she choosing to wear it out of a symbol of defiance, as a symbol of identity against anti-Muslim bigotry, and she'll say yes, that part of it is a choice. So you can have, an element of it that is a choice and that's not, and it's causing a lot of confusion, mostly in a lot of the women who are wearing it themselves, right? Because they may have reservations about the ideology. But they still, as an identity thing, they do want to wear it for defiance. So when you see them, and I met, I was in Europe. I think this is an even more precarious thing because when I toured for my book in the Netherlands and in Belgium, I did several live events there, and in all of those, there were women in hijabs and burqas. And I was like, they must be interested in hearing the other side. And then they came up at the Q&A afterwards, and they said, yes, I am also an ex-Muslim, but I haven't come out yet. And they were wearing full hijabs and burqas. And I was thinking, I'd walk down the street and I'd look at them and I'd make certain assumptions. But those assumptions are not true, because now I'm realizing what it is. So it's a very complicated issue, and it's a hard thing to navigate, because there is a gender issue that's very hot, that's embroiled in. There is there's a cultural issue. There's an issue of choice. There's so many different ways to frame it. And then, of course, there's a history of the symbol. I mean, the symbol historically, undoubtedly, was a male invention used to oppress women. So I think that the way that we speak about it, all of these arguments are legitimate. I do think that the liberal argument about women who want to wear it as a symbol of identity in defiance against anti-Muslim bigotry, I think that is a respectable argument. It's an argument I have problems with, as I'm sure you do too, but I think it's a respectable, compelling argument that we have to engage with. And then I think that the argument that Yasmin has is obviously extremely compelling and that's something that has to be engaged with too. And at least in the last year or two, I have seen, fortunately, both of these things coming up. I know Yasmin has done a lot of television and media interviews. She has become a very, very powerful voice on this and a very influential voice on this. And I've been just absolutely ecstatic to see that grow and to see her influence grow, even on the mainstream liberal channels. A lot of liberal people are talking about this. I think the work that Masih Alinejad did, the images from Iran coming out of women burning their hijabs, it's giving a different dimension to this debate that is resonating with a lot of liberal and Western feminists. It's people who I've spoken to who are now changing the way they think. But the reason that they're changing the way they think is because this is being framed not just as an issue of the piece of cloth and what it symbolizes, but as an issue of choice. And when you frame it, I think that way, then I think we could make a much better argument.
Yeah, no, I mean, couldn't
Yeah.
agree more with that. I want to just actually, because you brought up the Shia thing.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so, I was born in India, grew up in Canada. Up until, I guess, the first Intifada was like 80, 81, something like that?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, up until that point, I'd never heard
Oh,
the
wait, the
word
first what?
Intifada.
Well,
Like, when they went
yeah.
up and up,
Okay.
so it was
Okay.
like 80, 81 around that time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had never heard the word Shia until then. So I was about 11 or 12. Now,
Right.
we left India when I was 6. I hadn't heard. Okay, all I knew was Muslim. I didn't know Sunni Shia, right? And then
Yeah.
when I heard that, that's and then I asked my dad, like, what are they talking about? And like my father explained it to us. And then until much later on, I didn't even know about you know like the different madhabs, the different schools of thought, right? So
Mm-hmm.
these were things that I learned much later. But I mean, I know you spent some time growing up in Saudi and Libya as well, I believe, as well as Pakistan. I mean, like, and also being from a Shia background in Pakistan, which is majority Sunni.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm assuming you were much more aware of that than I was. Like I said, because I was very ignorant of those things until later, right? Like there was never anything told me like this is Shia. So it's like I think there's a huge lack of knowledge about Islam, and even like you know someone could come on and say, okay, Ali's an ex-Muslim, but being an ex-Shia coming from Pakistan is different than someone who was an ex-Salafi growing up in Saudi, right? Like it's two completely different things.
Yeah.
I just I was just wondering how aware were you of all those things growing up? Like was it always there, present, or did it took a while for you to like learn all the different nuances and everything of it?
For me, it was always present because I mean, Shias are a minority, so we were always immediately exposed. And when we started learning about our religion and our faith, when we were younger, the moment we started getting indoctrinated with it, we knew that there were some differences between what we did and what other people did. The very obvious one being praying, right? So praying was one of those things where the Shias pray with their arms to their sides.
Yep.
Sunnis pray with their arms sort of folded in front of them, on their chests or on their abdomens. So that was a very visible difference. Another thing that drove me insane was when we fasted. Shias they'd break their fast 10 minutes after the Sunnis. So you're just waiting, you're counting down the seconds, you've starved all day, you're about to eat, and then all of your Sunni friends start to eat, and you got to wait 10 fucking extra minutes. And that was because we do it at the end of sunset, they do it at the start of sunset. So that was a thing. Eid was on a different day for some reason. The Shias and Sunnis are programmed to see the moon differently. The same fucking moon, they see it the day one sees it on. Yeah, so Shias will often have their Eid the day after or day before or whatever. So those differences were apparent. And then I grew up mostly in Saudi Arabia. So when I was in Saudi Arabia, um, I was very acutely aware that I was from a Shia background because none of what we did was legal. So with Shias, they commemorate the month of Muharram, which is around the time that Muhammad's grandson Hussein It had the war in Karbala, and he sacrificed himself like Jesus, sort of in a way, to try and save Islam, in quotes, of course. And so that commemoration is banned in Saudi Arabia. You're not allowed to do that, and they would often, the way that they do it is there is something called a majlis. A majlis is when a whole bunch of people sit down, they listen to a lecture from someone called a zakir, who's a scholar, and the zakir gives you the lecture, and then after that, you hear the story of Karbala and the war, and people mourn and they cry and they self-flagellate, even very, very softly in Saudi Arabia, as we did there, and often the police would, around the Muharram time, go around looking for places where this was happening and raiding these apartments and these houses. So we always had somebody with a remote. The Zakir, we'd have videotapes of the guy speaking on TV. We'd always have someone with a remote ready to flip the channel if there was a raid, and just pretend like it was just a get together, a social gathering. So so we had to take precautions like that. We went to mosques. We had to pray with the Sunni way. My dad actually changed the Arabic spelling of our name. It's Ra and Dod,
Okay.
Wow, and then Ya, which is, or in Urdu, it's Rizvi with a Zwad. But he changed it to a Ra, Za, Fa, and Ya. So it's Rizvi. Just because Rizvi is or Radawi is a very, it's a very classic sort of Shia name. So there are many. So it's very, very acutely aware that I was Shia, and I knew about the differences between Shias and Sunnis. We didn't. I wasn't taught that Sunnis are bad. Most of our friends were Sunni. Most of my parents' friends were Sunni. So we even had some Shia Sunni marriages in our family. So we didn't necessarily think it was bad. It was just basically taught to us that it's a difference, and we're probably right and they're probably wrong.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, no, it's just like I said. He was just more talking about how there is, like even now, like with especially like the last couple of years, there's been a lot of focus brought onto like these things, like especially on the topic of Islam and stuff. But there's still a lot of ignorance, so it's just people don't realize that you know there's something going on internally in Islam as well, right? It's not just Islam versus the West. It's not one cohesive thing coming after the West. There's internal struggles. There's like Iran and Saudi aren't going to be forming an alliance anytime soon, right? Like there's like struggle going on there. Like because like I said, for even myself growing up in a Muslim household, I didn't know that until I was 11. I didn't didn't like different schools of thought. So I was just there, like that's why I was kind of trying to bring it up. I was just
Yeah.
and then sorry, and getting back to another thing about that, like we were talking about the Islamization, because I'm just trying to like okay, sorry, I'm just trying to because I've done some things that I think are wrong, and I'm just trying to clear stuff up, and I'm just hoping like talking about all these different things might make clear stuff up. Like I've used the term Arabization, like
Yeah.
okay, they've
Yeah.
Arabized, but in one sense that's wrong. Yes, it's Arabs. Yes, Islam started in the in the Arabian Peninsula, but it was one specific tribe of Arabs that imposed their will on other Arabs. Like I mean, like the Arabian Peninsula lost out on a lot of culture right at the start, before like now what's going on in South Asia, right? Like North Africa, like their whole entire like the Amazigh communities, the Berbers and all that, like that was being slowly pushed away. Like what happened in Iran, like so it wasn't like I prefer the term Islamization over Arabization. Like it's not like the Arabs themselves now. Yes, it's it's money coming out of Saudi, money coming out of Kuwait, money coming out of Qatar, but the Arabs themselves were the first ones to have everything wiped out from this one little small tribe of Arabs that came out, right? So I mean, like it's because now when you say Arabization, you could include North Africa as well, and they're not technically
Yeah.
Arabs, right? It's like I'm just saying, like a term like Islamization, I think would be better than Arabization. Like to not try to demonize any one people, right?
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of that I agree with. I think that if you use Arabization as a blanket term, then it's probably not a good thing. But on the other hand, one of the issues that I think that leftist regressives often make is they try to use um, certain words based on whether they are offensive to certain people or they demonize other people or not. Um, uh, and sometimes it's a little disingenuous. So in this case, I think it is accurate in for a lot of context to talk about it as Arabization, because Islam does include lots of aspects of Arab culture, most notably the language, right? So most of the times when people are talking about Arabization, they're saying that this was essentially like the British Empire went and they colonized half the world, right? I mean, those were British colonies, and I'm sure that it was just there's a lot of British people who didn't agree with it. Who didn't like what they were doing, weren't fans of the imperialism thing, but it was part of it was the British Empire. That's what they did. I think that with this was like most of these countries, the non-Arab countries and some of the Arab countries unwillingly, this was a tribe of Arabs, but it was Arab. So in that sense, that Arabization is an accurate thing. For instance, when people in Pakistan, instead of greeting each other, or people in Iran, instead of saying, Khuda Hafiz, or instead of saying, the usual local greetings, instead of that, they're saying Assalamu alaikum or, Allah Hafiz or Alhamdulillah. They're doing that all the time.
I hate that so much. The Allah is the first time I heard it, I'm like, what is that?
Yeah, that's Arabization,
yeah.
Right? So Arabization is, Christian Arabs and Muslim Arabs both use the word Allah for God very frequently. So it's not. So a lot of it really has to do with the language and certain elements of the culture that were brought in, right? That came with the religion. So religion did co-opt a lot of the culture. It did destroy the regional culture that was not related to Islam, but at the same time, some of the things that actually came in to Islam were also elements of the local culture, because people who created Islam were part of a certain culture at the time, and that culture was undeniably Arab as well. So I'm kind of I think there are two aspects to that. So what I totally respect your point, and I think that that's right. But at the same time, I don't think it's inaccurate to call it Arabization.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that, that. I hadn't really thought about that because the language thing. It's true. Like growing up, spoke Urdu. My parents, we would say Ramzan, right, with
Yeah.
a Z, or it's almost like a DZ like spelling. So, but now it's just Ramadan.
Yeah.
And same thing, like you said, with the Alafis and the Khulafis, it's putting the language. When you talk about it in terms of language, yes, it's putting that above it. But like the hijab, okay, whether or not it's part of because I'm using the hijab because it's so visual, right? So like Malaysia, 20 years ago, you wouldn't see, if you saw pictures from Malaysia, you wouldn't see the hijab. So I wouldn't say the hijab is Arabization. I would say that's more Islamization, right? Like something in the language, I could say yes, it's Arabization. And then again, same thing like what you're talking about with the they picked up different cultures. Like India is a perfect example. Like the Mughals were, like it was when the Persians came in and they saw the Mongols. Like I think that was the term they used for the Mongols, right? And so they picked up different aspects of each other's culture. Then if you go to weddings in India now, even Muslims' weddings will have all 4 days, which is like a Hindu thing, right? It's not that's not your typical Muslim.
Oh
wedding,
yeah.
right? So they are picking up certain local cultures, or they're keeping certain things, and not completely wiping it out, but for the most part, it's like it's just wiping out all cultures. And
Yeah, that's called syncretism when you take like aspects of different, when local cultures mix with imperial cultures mixed with certain religious cultures and religio imperial cultures, and everything kind of gets together. You'll see you'll see a mix of that. I mean, Indonesia is one of the biggest. It is the largest Muslim country in the world, with 250 million Muslims. It's got more Muslims than any other country in the world, and there are people over there where they eat dog meat too, right? So which any of the other Muslim countries would scoff at, and and it is true. Like you have Turkish Muslims who have less in common with Muslims in India than Muslims in India have with Hindus in India, right?
Yeah.
So there is that mix that happens, and this is one of the reasons why I think that the difference between Islam and Muslims is so important. I mean, it's set aside the Arabization. There's definitely Arab influence, but it's such a different thing. I mean, it's not that the Muslim people are extremely diverse. They're very, very heterogeneous, culturally, linguistically, in terms of their traditions, their mindsets, their outlooks, all around the world. Whereas Islam is a totally different animal, and there are very few. I argue for this too. I don't think that even the definition of the word Muslim really means what it used to mean 1400 years ago, right? And it doesn't. Nobody uses it that way either, and it's a tough thing because we don't know how to define it, and that's what causes a lot of confusion, right?
Yeah.
So,
But yeah, no, I mean, like I said, it's just also I think some of these things are because I was like this was not stuff I used to talk about until I got back from overseas. Because when I got back from overseas, it was started 2014. So this is when everything was really going haywire, right? Like everything was just starting to get really ratcheted up, and you know,
mhm.
people going crazy on social media. Then like all the insanity that we see now was just starting to come up in 2014, and then you had that whole thing with Ben Affleck and Sam Harris saying that's gross and racist and that kind of stuff, and it was just like that's when I was like, well, wait a minute, you're talking about a lot of wrong things, and it's also like I wanted to talk about this because you'll hear people say, well, that's just their culture, that's just Muslim culture. Like no, it's like saying Catholic culture, right? There's a huge difference between Catholics from even if like you take Catholics from like Spain and take Catholics from any Latin American country except for Brazil, because that's more Portuguese, right? But
Mhm.
they're not. Their culture is not identical. They obviously have some certain things in common, like they'll celebrate mass in similar ways. They'll celebrate Christmas, whatever. They'll have those holidays, but the culture from Argentina versus the culture from Spain are two different things, even though they're both.
Yeah, the day to day
Yeah,
is going to be different.
yeah. So
I think that that's true, and it's been interesting. Like in India, the way that Islam spread to different places in the world is very different, and there were different dynamics in play as well too. Like for example, in India, um, you had the caste system. The caste system was very powerful. You had higher castes and you had lower castes, and there were some people, if you were born in a lower caste, that's where you were going to stay. I mean, there was no way to move up. That's who you were, and that just went on for generations upon generations. And then, um, when Islam came to it, right, which was the Arabs and and Islam, they brought Islam. Islam was a culture. The Arabs were the people who came over there. They started. They offered something in Islam. They basically said that if you are a Muslim, if you convert and say La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and you become Muslim, then you're all the same. Right? So this was very appealing to people from the lower castes who found after wow we can break this like just progressive generational deadlock, this historical generational deadlock that we've been stuck in for centuries, and we can break it now just by saying La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah, and they did it, and then suddenly that disrupted the whole caste system, right? And then the caste is now you have people from the lower castes who are going up, and they have a whole different life, and they're building a whole different society. And then later on, the British Empire comes in, And suddenly, a lot of the things that were reserved and valued as upper caste things, like poetry and, like the upper castes, the Brahmins, all they used to sit and do poetry and literature and music. They used to do all that stuff, and nobles, government work, industry, and all of that stuff was for the lower and the mid castes. And suddenly, like those people who were involved in like all the engineers and everything, now they're moving up to the higher level. So there's a mixture of, there's this sort of Muslim invasion, there's the British Empire, then there is the local Indian culture and their history and what their values were, and the whole thing gets thrown into disarray. This is, sort of part of all these cultures mixing. And that's what happened in India, and that became the face of, I guess, the Muslim societies in India. There's a mixture of British influence, there's a mixture of Hindu influence, and then there's a mixture of the Arab/Islamic influence. And that's what forms a lot of Indian Muslim identity. You go to a different part of the world, you go to North Africa, completely different situation. You go to Turkey, completely different situation. Long history of the Ottoman Empire that came with its own sort of cultural and social historical elements. So there's some places that had more Sufi influence. There are many different kinds of Sufi influences too. So it's a very you see this kind of thing all over the world. So I'm just a little I'm skeptical when people have this assumption that there are a lot of people who are Muslims and they hold on to their Muslim identity. Don't they know what's in the Quran? Don't they know what Islam's all about? And the answer is no. The majority of times they don't.
Yep.
Most people don't know the language. They have not thought about it enough. They're just out doing the same stuff that everybody else does. And they just look at everything in terms of their tribe, their regional influences, their regional cultural and familial influences, and all of that plays a part into how they respond to situations.
Okay, this might end on a down note, but we'll see. Okay, so if you look at all the protests that are going on in Iran, then there was the women in Saudi Arabia were turning their abayas inside out, right? And then some of the polls that are coming out, more and more people wanting to be secular, questioning, atheists coming out of the Middle East, like even Saudi Arabia, I think it was 19 or 20% that said they were questioning. And these people are actually fighting the authority and wanting the authority to relax, right?
Yeah.
And open up. But then you look at the seeds that Saudis spread, with all their money and their influence, and all these madrasas and everything. So a place like Pakistan, where a clerical error, where they took out one line that's saying Muhammad is the final prophet in the oath of office for politicians, that clerical error caused riots for 3 or 4 days in Islamabad, and the military came in, and at one point the military sided with the protesters against the government, right? The population themselves went crazy when when a perceived relaxation from the government came in. So let's say Saudi does loosen up, or Iran does loosen up, or some of these countries who have been, like even places like Qatar and Kuwait, who've been spreading money out and spreading a very strict, literal, fundamentalist version of Islam in all these other places. If somehow or other they relax a little bit, will that be something that comes back to bite them in the ass? Because it's something that they've grown, right? They've spread this ideology now, and the people there have picked it up. And the people there seem to be, at least in Pakistan, the people seem to be more severe than the government. So if there's any type of even slight loosening from the government, the people seem to be going crazy. There was that.
Yeah.
You had him on your podcast. You had his son on, the politician who was killed by his own bodyguard because he was protesting. Yeah. The government tries to relax a little bit, and the people go crazy. Whereas in the Middle East, it seems like the people are fighting for their freedoms.
Yeah, a long time ago when people were talking about, I think this was before 9/11, we used to talk about this in Pakistan a lot, because Osama bin Laden was kind of a hero there at the time. And people used to say, well, we want Saudi Arabia to be democratic. We want them to be democratic. And I used to think, I was like, holy shit, I grew up there. And I'll tell you something, if the monarchy, those guys are having all these parties and everything, you would be able to tell whether they were Saudis or not, or Europeans. But if you had a democratic election, then bin Laden would win over them any day. So yes, I mean that's an issue. They've created this monster. I mean, so these countries, a lot of the Muslim and Arab countries, have had dictators entrenched in power for decades and decades. And these dictators, a lot of whom are actually secular personally, they have used um, religion as an excuse to keep people down and to control people. They've done it very, very unabashedly. So they have someone like Saddam, for instance. Saddam Hussein would promote religion to the extent that it kept his people under control, right? If he wanted to shut down any political opposition, he could just assume the role of a very religious man and be like, "You're against Islam. We're going to execute you for blasphemy," and then gain a lot of people's support. But on the other hand, if people's beards got too long, or if they started, holding too many sort of impromptu fatwa or khutbas or sermons in mosques, right, that he wasn't able to regulate, then those people would be whisked away in the middle of the night. You'd never hear from them again. So there was he had to use it in a way that he could manipulate people, but also not allow it to get enough power and influence that it would become a threat to him. So they've been playing this game, right? Even in Saudi Arabia, even in some of the more sort of really overtly religious countries, they've been playing this game for decades and decades, and it is the kind of thing where now, when you take that iron fist out of the way, when you remove them, the whole place descends into chaos. So you remove Saddam Hussein, and Iraq is still in chaos today, right? And the same kind of thing happened in Egypt. So this is the same kind of thing happened in Libya. So this is it's an issue, it's a problem, but in the long scheme of things, it's still a transitional phase, I think. I think it's just a matter of whenever you have a a very strong sort of secular dictatorship, and secularism is enforced onto. And one of the things I wrote about in my book is that when people in many Arab and Muslim countries, they don't think of secularism the same way that we here think of secularism. We associate secularism with liberalism and freedom, right? They associate it with enforced, like with dictatorships, because a lot of their
Yeah,
dictatorships were secular.
sorry. Like that's something I brought up too, and I said the word secular in the Middle East, especially in places like Libya and Syria and even Iraq,
Hmm.
it's poison because of the dictators that were there because they associate
Yeah,
secularism with that.
right. So what they did was, like, what is Iran's association? Iran, we joke about how they're always talking about conspiracy theories. Oh, this is a conspiracy. That's a Jewish conspiracy. This is an American conspiracy. But what happened in 1953? In 1953, Mohammad Mossadegh was the prime minister who was democratically elected in Iran. I mean, exactly what we all want here in the West, right? For Iran to be a democracy. Elected in Iran, then a coup with the CIA and the British joined together in a coup. They overthrow this guy, right? And then they install a dictator, Western-friendly dictator, and eventually, until the time of the Shah of Iran is ruled by a secular dictatorship, a dictatorship that enforces secularism. Right. So what happens and the same thing that was the same thing with Gaddafi. It's the same thing with a lot of, like with Iraq, a lot of these Arab countries. So what happens with that is that how do you oppose a dictator? Who are the people who are going to be able to mount an organized opposition to a dictator? You're not suicidal. I'm not suicidal. I'm not going to do it. Right. A lot of people who are, they're not going to have anything to organize around. But who is suicidal and has a reason to organize as a community? Right? Islamic fundamentalists. They're perfectly fine with jihad. They're perfectly fine with the idea of dying in the way of God. So they've formed these really strong oppositional groups, right? If you look at Syria now, most of the opposition to Assad came in the form of Islamic groups. In Egypt, what happened when Mubarak fell? What came in his place? The Muslim Brotherhood, Morsi, democratically elected, right? Now, what happens is that whenever you have these situations, there is a transition. They have to go through this transition, and then people see the bullshit that their democratically elected religious governments will bring them, and then it'll take a couple of decades for them to move to the next phase. This has happened throughout the history of the world. It's just that we get impatient. We think, oh, the Arab Spring happened and everything should change within a few years, but it doesn't. If you look at Iran, Iran is ahead of the game in that because they had that secular dictatorship that was brought down in 1979. This Islamic theocracy came in, but now, we've all heard reports of it. There's, Iran. The people of Iran are most likely the most pro-Western and the most secular population among any Muslim country in the world, and the clerical establishment is getting old. There's a lot of cracks in it. They're feuding with each other. We saw this with the revolution in 2009, right? Where there was a dispute about the election. So even the people, some of the icons of the Iranian Revolution are now fighting with each other. There's cracks in it. There's protests happening. There's women burning their hijabs. All this stuff is happening. And the next phase that we see in Iran should be, because Iran would have completed that process of going through a long period of secular dictatorship, then experimenting with what came to replace it, which is an Islamic fundamentalist government, and then what happens after that. And that's kind of it would take a very long time. It wouldn't take just a few years, but I feel like that probably will be the trajectory for a lot of these countries. And if we do want to see something there, some sort of democracy, liberal democracy, the way we value, we're going to have to wait much longer and have much more patience. I mean, even the United States, even though it was a democracy, women didn't have the right to vote until the 20th century. Blacks did not have, segregation existed until, 60, 70 years ago. You had, they went through hundreds of years of slavery. There's a lot of these pains that go through it. And when we look back, it feels like it's just a blip, but it wasn't. I mean, these things are messy. Democracy, the thing about democracy is it's enduring. I mean, if I have a dictatorship and I want to build a whole bunch of bridges and a hospital and a skyscraper, all I have to do is give the order. But if I'm in a democracy, I have to get have parliamentary committees together. I have to get people from different parties to agree. So the change is very slow. Development is very slow, but ultimately it's enduring. And I think that's something we have to keep sight of.
Yeah,
I'll shut up now.
No,
Yeah.
that's fine. No, I
Yeah.
agree with some of that. I mean, it's like I wasn't expecting something to happen right away. I was just talking about the mindset of the populace, right? So
Uh-huh.
at least in Iran, the population wants a change. They're fed up, right?
Yeah.
And the population in Middle Eastern countries and even some North African countries, like Tunisia is an example. They don't they want to move away from the fundamentalism, but like I said, I was getting depressed by like the population in Pakistan who don't seem to want any of that. They're fighting the government when the government tries to relax. The population themselves are fighting the government. So,
Mm-hmm.
that's where I'm a little depressed. I'm hopeful for the Middle East and North Africa. I think I'm actually more hopeful for the Middle East than I am for Pakistan, unfortunately.
Yeah, Pakistan is like I don't know what's going to happen in Pakistan. I'm very sort of cynical about Pakistan's future as well. Um, I do think, and I'm still convinced that in Pakistan there are still, even though we see these huge crowds of people showing up for the Mumtaz Qadri funeral and celebrating slain jihadists and things like that, uh, there's an element that seems to be scared. There's a majority, like a scared majority, and it's for that you're going to require a really strong government. And I have a lot of problems with Imran Khan, the current prime minister, but I think that some of the things that he's doing, like the acquittal of Asia Bibi, then retrying that case, hearing the appeal, and then acquitting her again and getting her out there, knowing what a sensitive issue it is, and how rabid the protesters are who are going against this. I mean, to the extent that they murdered the governor of the largest province there, right? So despite that, he has been able to stay in defiance of them. He gave a speech saying that we're not going to take this shit, and he's I think It's going to be slow, but I actually feel like the only solution to this is you got to let the civilian governments, um, you have to just let them be and let them go through the messy system that and the messy timeline that you have to go through when you're trying to set up an enduring democracy. The difference between Pakistan and India, it's not like India didn't see this stuff in the last 70 years.
No.
They did, but they stuck through it. It didn't happen that, okay, the moment you had some issue or some difficulty or some economic collapse or whatever, then suddenly the army came in. They're like, okay, we're taking over, new elections, and you have the same families coming in over and over again. In Pakistan, the first peaceful transition of power from one civilian government to another was in the early 2000s, or in the 2000s, actually. I don't even think it was the early 2000s, but that's the first time. Otherwise, the militaries just come in and step over and over. But you gotta let the democratic process go for all of its messes and all of its issues and all of its problems. You gotta let it take its course. And when you do, the civilian governments have a mandate. They are elected. They have a mandate. So Imran Khan does have the political capital to be able to go up and say, fuck you, we're going to acquit Asia Bibi. Bring on your protests. And when they know that the government is strong enough and has a mandate, having been elected by the people, to be able to do that, slowly and incrementally, there is some hope. And see all the qualifiers I'm throwing in here, that that things can get better as long as the army doesn't keep on stepping in. So I think that is the key for to just keep this process as there has been recently of just the civilian governments transferring power and for democratically elected governments to come into power.
Well, that is it's a little bit more hopeful than I thought it was going to end up being. So, thanks
I'm
for
a very
that.
optimistic guy. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I hope it does. Everything does turn out well. Anyways,
yeah.
I don't want to keep you too long because it is getting late. And
Oh no, this is fun. Yeah, we can go for like 10 minutes if you have anything else.
ah, well, I mean, if you have anything you're coming up, or are you giving any talks anywhere? I know you're still doing the podcast or anything, or do you have anything coming up if you want to talk about?
Yeah, I actually did. I turned down some of the public speaking starting in November over the holidays, so I wasn't doing a lot of it in the last few months just because I wanted to spend more time with my kid and stuff. But that's gonna start picking up this year again. So we're going to be doing some events, and I'll keep you guys posted about it.
Cool.
Yeah.
Well, anyways, like I said, I will let you go. Thanks a lot. If you just want to hang on for 1 sec, I'm just going to stop recording. Thanks everyone
All
for
right.
listening, and please like, share, and thanks a lot.